Interesting TCM and Acupuncture. Part 24, Approaching the Lake. Study of the Pulse. 18 frequently encountered pulses from traditional Chinese medicine literature. 1. Fumai, floating pulse. Category is Yang pulses. The poem of its shape. The floating pulse moves along the surface of the flesh, like elm pods, as light as hair. If it occurs in the fall, it may not cause illness. If there is chronic illness and the patient presents with a floating pulse, it should instill wariness if it changes. Poem of categories. Floating pulse is like wood floating on water. Floating and big and hollow is Komai, or hollow pulse. Hongmai, or flooding pulse, claps and floats, and when it comes, it flourishes and goes away leisurely. Floating pulse is light and even, like a turning Chinese onion in the fingers. Shumai, or empty pulse, is slow, big, and open, as though it's empty. If the pulse is weak and thin, it's called rumai, or soggy, moist pulse. If it is scattered, it's called sanmai, or scattered pulse, like a poplar flower, and does not have a set track. Explanation. The hongmai, flooding pulse, komai, hollow pulse, shumai, empty pulse, rumai, soggy or moist pulse, and sanmai, scattered pulse, are 5 pulses which present as floating. The first one is an excess pulse. The last 4 are empty pulses. Illness poem. The floating pulse is associated with exterior illness. Slow is wind, fast is tightness and cold. The floating pulse, if strong, is wind, fast is heat. Tightness is cold. If it is weak, the floating pulse is blood vacuity. Location poem. In the Tuan position, the floating pulse indicates headache and vertigo from wind. It can also indicate wind phlegm collecting in the chest. In the Guan position, it shows that earth is in decline and wood is in excess, liver depression and spleen deficiency. In the Chur position, it shows the person is not able to urinate freely. There's heat in the lower jiao. Explanation. According to modern research, this one pulse can indicate severe heart depletion when it is large and scattered. 2. Chenmai, or sinking pulse, which is in the yin category. Poem of its shape. Water moves and moistens the pulse. This is called sinking. The space between the tendons and bones is weak and slippery. On women, it shows in Tun, in men in Shu. If it occurs during the 4 times, it's called level. Poem of types. Chenmai, sinking pulse, is located near the bones and sinews. Fumai, hidden pulse, requires pressing into the sinew and bone to find it. Sinking and thin, feeling like silk thread, is called ruomai. Frail pulse, stringy and long and large, is called laomai, or confined pulse. Explanation. Laomai, or confined pulse, and fumai, hidden pulse, and ruomai, frail pulse, are 3 types of sinking pulse. The first one shows excess, and the other 2 show deficiency. Poem of illness. Sinking and deep is like water in the yin meridians. If it's fast, it shows heat. If slow, it shows damp. If slippery, it shows phlegm. If it has no strength, it is sinking with qi vacuity. If it's sinking and has strength, it shows cold accumulation. Location poem. In Tuan, a sinking pulse shows stagnant water in the chest. In Guan, it shows cold in the center, with pain and lack of connection. If in Chur, it shows turbidity and leaking. If the kidney is vacuous, it indicates pain in the lower waist area. Explanation. The character tong stands in for tongue, both mean pain. In the Cuan area, deep and weak are called heart pain. On the left Cuan is where the heart illnesses can be palpated. On the left Cuan, if it is deep and weak, it indicates heart illness in which the heart muscle loses some of its ability to pump blood. Heart illness has four major types: heart chi vacuity, heart blood vacuity, heart blood stasis, and heart fire flourishing. The heart muscle pumps blood, and in the eyes of TCM pulse diagnosis, if the pulse is deep and weak, there is a 94.04% chance that it will also be thin and fast, astringent, wire taut, knotted, or unevenly distributed pulse. Figure 19, diagram of floating pulse and sinking pulse on the superficial, middle, and deep levels. 3, Semai, or slow pulse, which is in the in category. Manifestation. A slow pulse beats 3 times per breath and indicates that yang is not ascendant and yin, qi, and blood are cold. When noting if a pulse is floating, deep or external or internal, it may be required to consume yin in order to restore the origin of fire. Poems of category. When the pulse arrives at 3, it's called Semai, or slow pulse. When it is slightly faster, it's called Huan, or moderate pulse. Moderate, when it is slow and thin, is called Semai, or choppy or stringent pulse. When it's floating and slow, it's called Xumai, or empty pulse, or vacuous pulse. Explanation. Huan, or moderate pulse, Semai, choppy or astringent pulse, and Xumai, empty pulse or vacuous pulse, are 3 pulse types associated with slow pulse. Huan, moderate pulse, is 1 beat faster than slow. Semai, choppy or astringent pulse, is slow and thin. Huan, moderate pulse, is a slow pulse which is floating and large. Weak pulses which are thin are usually referred to as sinking or deep. Chinese medicine holds that Xumai, or empty or vacuous pulse, and Ruomai, or frail or weak pulse, are 2 different concepts. Poem of illnesses. Slow pulse indicates main visceral disease or presence of much phlegm. If deep and chronic, look carefully for abdominal masses and obstruction in the intestines. If strong and slow, it is a sign of cold pain. If slow and without strength, there is vacuous cold. Location poems. If in Cuan it is slow, the upper burner is cold. If in Duan there is cold pain in the middle which feels unbearable, if in Chur the waist will seem heavy, as will the feet due to kidney deficiency. They can't help but defecate or urinate, and hernia pain ties the testicles. Explanation. The right guan position shows stomach illnesses. If guan is slow, there's stomach cold related illnesses. This may include stomach pain and stomach inflammation. At this time, there may be a stomach ulcer in the pattern of stomach cold. 4, Shuomai, or rapid pulse, which is in the yang category. Presentation poem. Shuomai, rapid pulse, is 6 beats in the space of 1 breath. Yin is minute, yang is flourishing, and there must be manic and upset, irritated, according to the rapid pulse in the floating, deep, external, and internal aspects. It can be distinguished between vacuous and excess. Rapid pulse in the case of children is normal and good. Poem of categories. Shuomai, or rapid pulse, is usually a beat faster than normal. Jinmai, or tight pulse is fast and stringy like a cord. Fast and sometimes stopping is called Mai. Hurried pulse is fast in the center Guan position and is called Mai, spinning bean or moving pulse. Explanation: Mai or tight, Mai or urgent, and Mai, spinning bean or moving pulse, are three pulse types contained within fast. Tight is the same speed as fast, but it's thick and hard like a rope and seems like a string that attaches to the hand. Urgent is the same speed as fast, but it skips a beat sometimes. Moving is the same as fast, but it happens in the Guan center pulse. Pain is usually associated with tight and moving pulse types. Poem of illnesses. Fast pulse is when yang heat is present. It's when gentleman fire needs to be treated. Excess requires cold to be reduced and vacuity to be tonified with warmth. When the lung is ill in the fall, there is reason for concern. Location poem. When Tun is fast, the throat and mouth and tongue will have ulcers. There will be red vomiting and coughing, which will lead to lung sores. When it's in Guan, there is fire attacking the liver. In Chi, you should use Ziyin Jiang Wu decoction. Explanation: in the right Guan, it's a sign of stomach illness. When the Guan position is slippery and fast, it indicates stomach heat, which can include stomach pain as a result of inflammation, and the 12 types of stomach ulcer found in stomach heat effusion. Figure 20, slow and rapid pulses. Number 5, Semai, or thin pulse, which is in the yin category. Presentation poem. Thin pulse is usually like a thread. It often follows deep pulse. In spring and summer, or in young people, it's not a good sign. But in older people, or fall and winter, it's quite normal. Poem of categories. Rumai, soggy pulse, and Weimai, minute pulses, are similar. Explanation: Semai, thin pulse, is like a thread. It will seem obvious to the finger. It shows the qi and blood are vacuous and damp. Rumai, or soggy pulse, is floating and thin. When pressed heavily, there is no force. This is when the jing and blood are deficient and the spleen is vacuous and damp. Weimai, or minute pulse, is deep and extremely thin, as though it's present but not present. After a long illness, yang qi will be lost. When new disease is yang, qi will be outburst and taken off like a car crash. Poem of illnesses. Thin pulse is when blood and qi are being lost. The body is vacuous as a result of depletion due to overwork and the 7 emotions. If it's not damp qi attacking the waist, then it's injury to essence and sweat pouring out. Explanation: the pulse in this condition is thin and long without any break. Location poem. When Xuan is thin, there will be vomiting. When Guan is thin, there will be the appearance of bloating due to a weak stomach. Chi indicates that the dantian is cold. There's leaking of diarrhea, dysentery, and nocturnal emission essence. This is called tuo, or to take off yin. Explanation: when the pulse is deep and thin like a thread, it will be weak and without strength. This is called a Semai, or thin pulse. It's also called xiaomai, or small pulse, and is a sign that blood and qi are vacuous in the extreme. 6, hongmai, flooding or overflowing pulse, in the yang category. Manifestation poem. When there is an overflowing pulse, when it's coming, great flourishing will occur. When it goes, it will be in decline. It will fill the finger and tends to occur in the summer. If it happens in spring, fall, or winter, Yang will rise and scatter, and fire can be certain. Category poem. Hong Mai, flooding pulse, and overflowing pulse comes with a clapping sensation after declining. It surges again and comes in waves. If you wish to know what a Shimai or full surging pulse feels like, press down on a cord as you pull it tight. Explanation. Hong Mai, flooding or overflowing pulse, and Shimai, full or surging pulse, are excess types. It means yang flourishes pathologically. However, the Shimai, full pulse and surging pulse, and Hong Mai, flooding pulse, overflowing pulse, are different, and it has become more of a string and solid sensation, full of floating, middling, and sinking, 3 parts. 6. Hong Mai, flooding pulse or overflowing pulse, in the yang category. Illness poem. Hong Mai, or flooding or overflowing pulse, is yang flourishing, but blood is vacuous. The paired fire burns and causes heat illnesses. There is distension and fullness in the stomach, which must be treated early. There is yin vacuity, which leaks in a hesitant way. Location poem. Hong Mai, or flooding or overflowing pulse, in Xuan, shows heart fire in the upper jiao. On the lung pulse, overflowing pulse shows that metal cannot endure. If the level there is fire and stomach is vacuous, observe inside the Duan. If the kidney is vacuous and there is yin fire, look at Shi. Explanation. Hong Mai, flooding or overflowing pulse, is also called large pulse. The pulse shape is large. When putting the finger down lightly, it has strength. Figure 21, figure 2I, thin pulse and big pulse. 7. Shu Mai, or empty or vacuous pulse, is in the yin category. Presentation poem. It's slow and large. When it is pressed, it is loose. The presentation has no border and is like an empty valley. Kou Mai, or hollow or scallion pulse, and Shu Mai, empty or vacuous pulse, are not the same. Kou Mai, hollow or scallion pulse, floats largely and is round like a Chinese onion. Explanation. Scallion and vacuous pulses are both contained in the floating category, but they're different since scallion is floating with an empty center like a Chinese onion. Illness poem. Shu Mai, or empty or vacuous pulse, means the body is injured by heat. Then much sweat runs out. If there is fever and yin vacuity, it must be treated early. Nourish nutritive qi and raise qi in order to treat it. Poem of categories. If the blood is not flourishing in the heart, Cun will be vacuous. If in Guan, the abdomen will distend and it will be difficult to digest food. The bones will be steaming and there will be flaccidity obstruction, which will injure essence and blood. This will present on the Shenmen point. 8. Shimai, or full or excess pulse, is in the yang category. Presentation poem. Floating and deep can be large and long. When the finger does not meet empty vacuity and there is tightness, it is hot and the triple burner experiences fire, it will pass the intestines and sweat is an indication of a healthy recovery. Poem of categories. Shimai. Full pulse and excess pulse can be floating or deep, but it has great strength. Jinmai, tight pulse, is like a metal string twisting without stop. You must know that Lao Mai, or confined pulse, is deep and hidden between the tendons and bones. Shimai, or full or excess pulse, is yang and is larger than string taut pulse and longer. Explanation. Jinmai, or tight pulse, Laomai, confined pulse, and Shimai, full or excess pulse, are 3 similarly excess types, and they all have force. But Jinmai, tight pulse, tends to show tightness characteristics like a string on both sides. Because there is pain, it contracts. Laomai, confined pulse, is deep and hidden between the tendons and bones, but it seems large because blood is stagnant. There may be obstruction in the intestine, leading to swelling. It feels like something trapped in an underground prison. 8. Semai, full or excess pulse, is in the yang category. Semai, full or excess pulse, is yang fire causing stagnation. It comes violently and causes people to become crazy, delirious, and vomit. Because of yang poison injury through diet, it results in difficulty passing stool. So its pain is due to obstruction of qi. Location poem. If the Tuan position is excess, the face will be red from wind heat. The throat will be painful. The tongue will be hard. Qi fills the chest. In Guan, the spleen will be hot and the middle palace full. In Chur, it is pain in the waist or intestinal excess and heat that is not smooth. Figure 22, empty, full pulse characteristics. 9, Huamai, slippery pulse, yin in the center of yang. Presentation. Slippery pulse feels like a pearl hidden in water. It comes and goes, flowing toward the front. Slippery and fast are not precisely the same thing. Fast, the pulse only presents with relatively fast frequency. Explanation. Slippery pulse belongs to fast pulse and is palpable on the 4 sides. The slippery pulse gives a sense of flowing water. This is because it's associated with phlegm from food consumption. Phlegm from food accumulation gives rise to heat and causes a fast pulse. Heat-related fast pulses and slippery pulses are different. Illness poem. Slippery pulse is when the original yang qi declines. Then phlegm gives rise to illness and food causes disaster. Then there's rebellion, vomiting, and nosebleed. Bleeding from the lower part of the body. Women's pulse being slippery can often be an indicator of pregnancy. Explanation. It is inaccurate to say that vitality is in decline. In fact, this relates to yin in the center of yang presenting in the pulse. 9. Huamai, slippery pulse, yin in the center of yang. Location. When Tuan is slippery, the diaphragm has collected phlegm. There will be sour vomiting with stiff tongue and cough. When in Guan, it comes from food and liver and spleen heat. If there is diabetes, thirsting and wasting disorder, and drenching symptoms can be reflected in chirp. Explanation. The right Guan is related to stomach illnesses. The Guan pulse showing speed and slippery presentation is stomach heat, including stomach pain, and gastritis, stomach ulcer and duodenal ulcer, stomach fever type. 10. Semai, choppy pulse or stringent pulse, is in the yin category. Presentation. Thin, slow, short, and astringent are difficult to differentiate. Scattered and stopped are how to listen with the finger. If it's like rain falling, it will scatter easily. When ill, it's like a silkworm eating a leaf slowly. Poem of categories. The pulse that is not properly timed is called semai or choppy pulse or astringent. Scraping bamboo with a light knife is short and difficult. Weimai, minute pulse, with semai, choppy or astringent pulse, are difficult to judge. Weimai, minute pulse, is very soft, like it only lasts a moment. Floating and deep are not differentiated. Explanation. Weimai, or minute pulse, is different from semai, choppy or astringent pulse. When touching it seems like nothing. Poem of illnesses. Astringent pulse comes from lack of blood and injured essence. Overturning stomach and loss of yang causing sweat to sprinkle out. Cold and damp enters the nutritive and causes blood to be impeded. In women, this is not a sign of pregnancy if there is no period. Location poem. In Xuan, when it's astringent, the heart is vacuous and there is chest pain. Stomach vacuity and flank of the chest will be bloated and occurs in Guan. If in Chur, it can mean the essence and blood are injured. The intestine collects and leaks, causing blood to leak out from the anus. Explanation. If the left Xuan is deep and astringent, there will be heart illness. The heart rate disease, high diagnostic value of myocardial ischemia, in the TCM pulse diagnosis of myocardial ischemia, Chenmai, sinking pulse, and Semai, choppy pulse or astringent pulse accounts for about 94.4, and Shimai or thin pulse is Shuomai, rapid pulse, and Semai or astringent pulse. Figure 23, slippery pulse and choppy pulse and wiry pulse and tight pulse comparison. Xuanmai or wiry pulse or string taut pulse, yin in the center of yang. Poem of its shape. Xuanmai or wiry pulse seems to be tight and straight and long. The liver meridian wood is flourishing and causes injury to earth. Anger causes chestfulness and the patient will always sigh. There will also be lacrimation in the eyes. Xuanmai or wiry string taut pulse feels like picking a guitar string up and down. String taut, wiry, straight. Jinmai, tight pulse, is like a rope either side to attach the fingers on. Jinmai, tight pulse, is focused on the left and right, like wire on the finger in its strength. Jinmai, tight pulse, is focused on the left and right, like wire on the finger with the strength. Xuanmai, or wiry pulse, string taut pulse, is a focus on and down for string taut. Illness poem. The liver and gallbladder pulse is tight and can be characterized into yin and yang. It comes from food leading to phlegm, cold, and heat due to malaria. Floating and deep, slow and fast all have the same clear, large and small, single and dual, as well as light and heavy. Location poem. When Duan is wiry, there will be headache and much phlegm in the diagram. Cold and heat, abdominal obstructions, and tumors look in the left guan position. The right guan position may tell us of chest and abdominal pain with cold stomach. The center of Chur can tell us of hernia and leg cramps. 12. Jinmai, tight pulse, is in the yang category. Poem of its shape. Lift and press like rotating cord. With heavier pressing, it's like a rope. Because its shape is called tight pulse, it comes from cold pathogens invading. Internally, it results in sore abdomen. Externally, it results in pain in the body. Category poem. It's seen with Xuanmai or wiry pulse. Illness discussion. Jinmai or tight pulse indicates pain in relation to cold. Gasping, cough, wind illnesses, and vomiting, cold phlegm, rising and tight, external cold must be dissipated. Tight and deep, warm will scatter and make the patient calm. Location poem. If Duan is tight, then the qi is separated in ren yang and the mouth. If guan is tight, the heart and abdomen will be painful and sinking. If Chur is tight, there is cold in the genitals. It's a sign that there is suckling piglet qi and hernia pain. Wiry pulse versus tight pulse comparison. 13. Duanmai or short pulse is in the yin category. Shape and category poem. The two heads are contracted and are called Duanmai or short pulse. Semai, choppy pulse, is astringent and short. Slow and thin are difficult to differentiate. Short and astringent and floating are common in the fall. 3 spring months are when they become pathogenic as a result of dry evil. Explanation. Semai or choppy pulse and astringent and Duanmai or short pulse are also short, but it is also slow and thin, and mainly because of the difficulty of running back and forth. Poem of illnesses. The Duanmai or short pulse can only be seen in Duan or in Chur. When short and slippery, usually they have been injured by alcohol, which has damaged their spirit. Floating means the blood is astringent. Sinking means qi stagnation and blood stasis. Duan controls head pain and Chur abdominal pain. 14. Changmai or long pulse is in yang. Shape and category poem. If it passes the original location, this is a Changmai or long pulse. Xuanmai or wiry string taut pulse is not too long, but very tense string pause, taut and long pulse are quite different in presentation. A good doctor can know how to distinguish. Explanation. Long pulse passes the original location in Xuan is called overflowing. If it's in Chur, it's called treading pulse. String taut or wiry pulse is similar to long pulse, but string pulse does not pass the original pulse taking position. Thus, it presents like pressing down on the string of a tuned instrument and is hard and long. Illness poem. Long pulse is long and uniform in size. If it changes from normal, the illness seems to lead from a rope. If it's not in a yang poison causing insanity or epilepsy, it may be yang ming heat attacking deeply. Figure 24, short pulse and long pulse comparison. 15, Huan Mai, or moderate or sluggish pulse, is in the yin category. Shape poem. Huan Mai, or moderate or sluggish pulse, is 4 times per breath, winding like a willow branch in the light wind. If you wish to recognize the nature of vitality and spirit within the pulse, it is in its slow-moving and harmonious nature. Category poem. It can be seen in Chirmai, or slow pulse. Illness poem. Huan Mai, or moderate or sluggish pulse, comes from a decline of nutritive and defensive, being plentiful. If wind and damp attack the vacuous spleen, the neck will be painful, hard, and obstructed. It can occur within floating, deep, large, or small pulses. Location poem. In Chuan, a sluggish pulse indicates pathogenic pain in the nape of the neck. In Guan, it indicates dizziness caused by wind, or with stomach vacuity. If Shenmen in Shi is moist and leaks if wind constipation, or it can be unsteady feet. Figure 26, moderate pulse. 16, Semai, or hurried pulse. Poem of its shape. Hurried pulse is fast, moves, and stops. It's when there is an extreme yang and yin is lost. The triple burner has stasis fire burning and flourishing. If it develops further, it must lead to severe lifelessness. If it retreats, not fast, and stops, it can return to life. Poem of categories. It appears within the Dai pulse category. Poem of illnesses. Hurried pulse happens when fire causes illness, such as it belongs to the following 5 reasons which need to be carefully studied. It occurs with gasping, coughing, and collection of phlegm or insanity due to poison. 17, GMI, or knotted pulse. Poem of its form. Knotted pulse is slow and sometimes stops briefly. Alone, yin flourishes and yang is lost. If you see floating with knotted pulse, it means qi stagnation that must use the method of sweating. If you see sinking with knotted pulse, it means food accumulation, and you should use the method of purging. We decide different methods of treatment based on pulse diagnosis. Category poem. It belongs to Dai pulse. Poem of illnesses. Knotted pulse is caused by qi and blood collecting, old phlegm and knotted sinking with pain and crying. The interior accumulates and it results in swelling on the exterior. There are hernia and genital illnesses, so it belongs to yin. 18, Dai Mai, or intermittent pulse. Poem of its form. It moves and sometimes stops. It cannot go back. And the recurring action is therefore taken as a substitute. Then it's called intermittent pulse. The patient can be cured. The normal people are related to longevity. Those who have intermittent pulse will not live long. Poem of categories. If it's fast and sometimes stops, it's called hurried. If it's slow and stops, it's called knotted. If it stops and cannot return, it's called intermittent. Knotted is light and intermittent is heavy. Poem of illnesses. Intermittent pulse occurs when original qi declines. Stomach pain and diarrhea leak from the lower origin. Also, they cough blood from the middle palace. Women may experience this after the 3rd month of pregnancy. Note, hurried, knotted, and intermittent pulses, which are unregulated. If knotted and slow and unhurried, and stop sometimes in the center, as well as not being regulated to a specific number, it's often seen that yin is flourishing and qi is knotted. Then cold, phlegm, and blood will stagnate. If it is possible to infer that qi and blood are mutually vacuous and in decline, this pulse shows the heart and blood are not working. The pulse seems to jump and is not even. Then this case must be serious. Knotted pulse is yin in nature. Hurried pulse is fast and stops sometimes. It also does not have any order. It is often seen in excess yang and flourishing heat. Qi and blood and phlegm stagnate from food, which is stuck in the interior. It shows the organ qi is in decline and belongs to yang. Intermittent pulse comes and stops. It occurs without order. After enough time, it may naturally return. It is often seen with organ qi decline and minute qi with pain. Fright and injury, intermittent pulse belongs to yin. Knotted pulse, intermittent pulse, and hurried pulse can all have pre-heaven characteristics. In this condition, it means that the illness is not related to the organ. Key points. If fast pulse sometimes stops, it belongs to hurried pulse. If slow pulse sometimes stops, it belongs to knotted pulse. If it does not have a regulation, or when it stops, it's intermittent pulse and has compensation function. Intermittent pulse, if arriving slowly, is regular and reverts to stopping. If it returns to normal after some time, it means there's no compensation function. Figure 25, knotted and hurried and intermediate pulse comparison. Note, 18 types of pulses are common. 1. Fumai, or floating pulse in the yang category. 2. Chenmai, or sinking pulse in the yin category. 3. Chirmai, or slow pulse in the yin category. 4. Shuomai, or rapid pulse in the yang category. 5. Ximai, or thin pulse in the yin category. 6. Hongmai, or flooding pulse or overflowing pulse in the yang category. 7. Shumai, empty pulse in the yin category. 8. Shirmai, full pulse or excess pulse in the yang category. 9. Huamai, slippery pulse, yin in the center of yang. 10. Semai, choppy or stringent pulse in the category of yin. 11. Xuan or wiry pulse, yin in the center of yang. 12. Jinmai or tight pulse, yang. 13. Duan short pulse, which is yin. 14. Changmai, long pulse, which is yang. 15. Huan moderate pulse, which is yin. 16. Cumai, hurried pulse. 17. Jiamai, knotted pulse. 18. Daimai, intermediate pulse. Thank you for watching.